Hi, so for this video session, we're going to talk about the interbranch transactions, particularly interbranch transfer of cash and interbranch transfer of merchandise. Now, in interbranch transactions, since these branches does not have investment in branch account in their books of account, accounting for interbranch transactions will be done as if the interbranch transfer of merchandise and interbranch transfer of cash was done through the home office. So first, we'll talk about the interbranch transfer of cash. So you have branch 1, you have branch 2, and then you have the home office. So say for example, branch 1 sends money to branch 2. Accounting for this will be done as if branch 1 sent the money to home office and the home office forwards the same to branch 2. As for the journal entries, the branch 1 will debit home office credit cash, thereby decreasing the home office account. While on the other hand, branch 2 will receive cash as if it was sent by the home office, crediting home office, debit cash, credit home office. And then the home office will just record a transfer of asset. So from investment in branch 1, it will be transferred to investment in branch 2. So investment in branch 1 account will decrease, and then investment in branch 2 will increase for the same amount, which is the amount of cash that was transferred. So even if the cash was transferred from branch 1 to branch 2 directly, the accounting entries or the journal entries are treated as if it was sent through the home office. Now, interbranch transfer of merchandise. So normally interbranch transfer of cash does not normally pose a problem. So for interbranch transfer of merchandise, say for example you have branch 1, you have branch 2, and then you have the home office. Okay. So first, home office sends merchandise to branch 1. So the home office will record debit investment in branch 1, credit shipments to branch, and if there is a freight paid by the home office will credit cash. If it's paid for by branch 1, then branch 1 will credit cash. Take note in shipments, as what we have mentioned in other video discussions, branch 1, the receiving branch, is always the entity who will record freight in, regardless of who paid for the freight. So branch 1 will debit shipments from home office, debit freight in, and credit home office. Now say for example, the home office changed its mind and forwarded the inventory sent to branch 1, forwarded the same to branch 2. So how will it be accounted for? Okay. Same thing as for interbranch transfer of cash, the transfer of merchandise from branch 1 to branch 2 will be treated as if the branch sends the merchandise to the home office and the home office will forward the same to branch 2. Okay. So the transfer of merchandise will presume that the branch 1 sends the merchandise to the home office, and it was the home office who forwards the merchandise to branch 2, even if physically the merchandise was just sent directly from branch 1 to branch 2. So the pro forma entry for branch 1 would be to debit home office, okay, credit shipments from home office, thereby decreasing the shipments from home office account, credit freight in. So if you'll remember in the previous slide, there was a debit of shipment from home office and debit of freight in. Since it was transferred, freight in was credited, and of course the transfer of merchandise from branch 1 to branch 2 will necessarily entail cost. So if branch 1 paid for the freight, then branch 1 will credit cash. So if you will notice, there are two freight charges here. So you have the first freight charge paid for by the home office, and then you have the second freight charge paid for by branch 1. we will discuss the implication of this in the slides later. So again, debit home office, thereby decreasing the home office current account. Credit shipments from home office, credit freight in, credit cash for the freight. Upon receiving, branch 2 will debit shipment from home office, debit freight in, and credit home office. So it's as if the merchandise was sent by the home office. This is your pro forma entry upon receipt of the merchandise. Now, how about for the home office? The home office will first debit shipments to. I'm sorry, this is an error. Debit shipments to branch 1. This should be shipments to branch 1 because the original entry for shipment is debit investment in branch, credit shipments to branch. So in order to cancel the shipments to branch 1, you should debit shipments to branch 1, and then to recognize the new shipments to branch 2, credit shipments to branch 2. Again, this should be shipments to branch 1, debit, and then credit shipments to branch 2. This is to recognize the transfer of the merchandise. Now, of course, the investment accounts would also change. So debit investment in branch 2 because the merchandise is now transferred to branch 2. Debit investment in branch 2, and because the shipment originally sent to branch 1 was transferred, then it is correct that we should decrease the investment in branch 1 account. So if you will notice the reciprocal accounts here do match. For example, debit home office, thereby decreasing the home office account in branch 1. You also credit investment in branch 1, thereby decreasing the account investment in branch 1. So here you have a credit of home office current in branch 2, thereby increasing the account. You also have here a debit in investment in branch 2. Okay. So being reciprocal accounts, they should be equal. Discussions about reconciliation of reciprocal accounts is in a different video discussion. So how to deal with freight charges? So if you'll remember, as I have mentioned before, forwarding a merchandise from branch 1 to branch 2 will entail additional freight charge. So there's now 2 freight charges. Okay? If it was sent directly from the home office to branch 2, then probably the home office would save some freight charges. So how to deal with these differences in freight charges? So here we have an example. The home office sent merchandise costing 100,000 to branch 1 and paid freight of 600. The home office later changed its mind and asked branch 1 to send the 100,000 worth of merchandise to branch 2. Branch 1 paid freight of 500. If the home office sent the merchandise directly to branch 2, meaning coming from home office directly to branch 2, the freight would have costed only 1,000. So if you'll try to compute the total freight charges paid by home office in branch 1, it will add up to 1,100. However, if it was sent directly from home office to branch 2, the freight charge would have only been 1,000. So there is an excess freight of 100, okay, due to improper planning probably by the home office. So the next question is, who should shoulder this expense, this additional excess freight? Okay. So, journal entry. Let's journalize the transaction we had earlier. Debit investment in branch 1. Credit shipments to branch with a cost of 100,000. Credit cash for the freight. And debit investment in branch 100,600. Upon receipt, branch 1 will debit shipments from home office for the cost of the merchandise, debit freight in, and credit home office of 100,600. So if you'll notice, reciprocal accounts are balanced. Okay. Now, branch 1 forwards the merchandise to branch 2. And as what we have discussed, it will be treated as if the merchandise was forwarded to home office and present to branch 2. So journal entry is debit home office you will notice that there is a debit here, or there is a credit of 500 cash, which was the additional freight paid by branch 1 in order to send the merchandise to branch 2. So credit shipments from office for the cost of the merchandise, credit the freight that was originally debited, and then credit cash, which is the freight from branch 1 to branch 2. Now, if you will notice, the 500 here is charged in the home office account. It is correct and it's right because it was due to the improper planning of the home office, which led to the additional freight paid by branch 1. So it is rightful that the home office should be charged with such amount. Okay. So upon receipt, shipments, the branch 2 will debit shipments from home office, debit freight in credit home office. Now take note of the freight in debited in branch 2. The freight in debited in branch 2 is 1,000 and not the 1,100. Okay, because what is debited as freight in is the freight which would have been debited if the home office sent directly the merchandise to the branch. Okay, so if the merchandise was sent by the home office directly to branch 2, the freight would have been 1,000. That's why the debit here of freight in is 1,000 and not the sum of these two freight charges, 1,100. Okay, and credit home office 1,100. Now, as for the home office, so home office will record the transfer of shipments, debit shipments to branch 1 and credit shipments to branch 2. And then debit investment in branch 2, 101,000 if you'll notice, which is the same amount as credit in the books of accounts of branch 2. Then credit investment in branch 1, 100,100, which is the same amount which was debited in the books of branch 1. Now, if you will notice, there's a difference of 100. This is the excess freight what we are talking about. So who should shoulder this? It will be the home office. So one may ask, shouldn't isn't that freight is an adjunct account and should properly be added to the purchases or to the shipments? In this case, because it results to improper planning, this should be treated as an expense taken against probably the manager of the home office in evaluating his performance. So this should be treated as an expense and not capitalized as part of the inventory. So again, if you will notice, it's charged to the home office because it's due to the improper planning. So debit investment in branch 2, which is the amount credited here in home office. Credit investment in branch 1, 101,100, the amount debited here in the books of the branch 1. And then as for the excess, which is the difference between the freight charges paid, 1,100, and the debited or capitalized freight, which is 1,000, difference of the 100, it's recorded as interbranch freight expense. Now, what if the mistake in shipment resulted to savings in freight charges? This is very rare, but I have seen that in some books this is given as an illustration, so I will just explain it as well. So say for example, the total freight paid for because of the mistake was lesser as compared to the freight from home office directly to the intended branch. Again, this is very rare, but let's just say, for example, for the sake of discussion, it happens. So same given. The only difference is that if the home office sent the merchandise directly to branch 2, the freight would have costed 1,500. So the total freight paid for, okay, from home office to branch 1, from branch 1 to branch 2 is 1,100. If it was sent directly from home office to branch 2, the total freight would have costed 1,500. So because of this mistake, there's a savings on freight charges amounting to 400. The question, how do we deal with these savings? Do we record the savings? or do we record it in the books of the home office? Just like the um, interbranch freight expense. Okay. Should the home office record the savings as income? The answer is no. Of course, this is the in application of the conservatism principle or prudence principle, that the entity should not recognize any in case of doubt. The entity should not recognize possible income. So how do we account for that? Okay, so you have the transfer, debit investment in branch, 100,600. You know the usual, same as before. And then debit home office, 101,100. Shipments from home office, credit 600, credit cash. So this is the difference. Debit shipments, 100,000. Debit freight in. In the previous illustration, where the freight charge from home office directly to branch 2 is lesser, we would have debited here 1,000, or we debited here 1,000. But in this case, because the freight charge from home office directly to branch 2 is higher, so we will use the actual freight charges paid for by the entity, which is 600 plus 500, you have 1,100. So credit home office 1,100. And so you have here the shipments to branch 1, shipments to branch 2, and then finally you have debit investment in branch 2, 101,100, and credit investment in branch 1, 101,100. You do not see the interbranch freight expense because it's not treated as an expense. In fact, it is a savings. But because of the prudence, in application of prudence principle or conservatism principle, we do not recognize such savings or income. Okay. So I hope you learned something with this video session. If you have questions, you can comment it down in the YouTube video.